Allahu, 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 Allah, Allahu, 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 Allah, Allahu, 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 Allah, Allahu, Allah.
Thank you very much for attending this evening event, and we're quite honoured. And like Khalid said, I will try to wrap it up as briefly as I can. But I suppose I was a little stumped about how to start this. Should I start with a pop quiz with you, Mark? Or there you go. Or should I just have a lecture informing you? I suppose my first curiosity is me curious about you guys. I mean, that most of you are from Keighley area, is that correct? I think a few from Ilkley I've heard. Is it mainly Keighley? Yeah. And I am curious about is there anything pressing you would like to know tonight, so that in this 20 minutes I have your speech I actually do address some of the things, or is there you just want some general knowledge about what it is we do in the month of Ramadan, because that's the basic theme of the talk. Is there anything other than that? Okay, there we go. So, as maybe some of you are aware, the fast in the month of Ramadan is one of the 5 pillars of Islam. The 5 pillars of Islam being to be a Muslim, someone testifies that there's no God except the God himself, the one God, and that Muhammad is his last and final messenger. And then there's the performances of the prayer, the 5 prayers, which you'll see one of the prayers being demonstrated tonight, which is do you know which prayer it would be? It's it's the dusk prayer. So when the sun's gone down, it's basically through the day those 5 prayers, they're praying in different positions of the movements of the sun, and then in the night it shifts. So there's 5 prayers. This prayer will be the dusk prayer when the sun's gone down, and that's the breaking of the fast as well. And then, so the 5 pillars, the testification of faith, the prayers, the payment of zakat, which is like sort of like a religious tax, like you have tithe in the Christian community. It's like 2.5% of your surplus wealth, if you have a certain amount. That you give to a charity, you give to the poor people, and that specifically in Ramadan, that's often, especially in the Asian community, with the predominant Muslim community here in West Yorkshire, that's when they give their zakat. So you'll see, I just saw the news this week actually, in America, there's over, I don't know how billions it was, over at least $1 billion in charity given this month. So it's a real month where there's a lot of charity given out. And you'll see a lot of charity organisations, I don't know if you're aware of, so a lot of Muslim charity organisations really reaching out and appealing to people to give in this month. So it's not just a month of fasting, it's also a lot of charity given in this month as well. And then the 4th pillar, which is the fasting, the month of Ramadan. And then the last one, the 5th pillar, is what comes soon after this month of Ramadan. We've got 3 months after. Muslims go and perform the pilgrimage to Mecca at the end of the Islamic year. So these are the 5 pillars of Islam, this month of Ramadan, the fasting of Ramadan being one of them. So my next point is, what would you say the significance of the month of Ramadan is? Obviously I've said it, is that when we think of Ramadan, we think of fasting, but it's not. I suppose the question is, why do we fast the month of Ramadan, Muslims? Does anyone have any idea? The month of Ramadan, it's not really, even though fasting is the most apparent thing and obvious thing about this month, it's why we do it. It's because it's the month in which the Quran was revealed. So the holy book of the Muslims, it was revealed in this month, the beginning of it, which was spread out for 23 years. And so, really, what Muslims are doing in this month of Ramadan is it's a month of thanks for the guidance that they've received in their life, that they've got clarity, they've got sense, they've got a book that gives them sense making in their life. and really to show gratitude for that. And so Muslims really dedicate themselves in this month of Ramadan to do many acts of worship, one of them being the fasting. And fasting in Arabic the word is siyam. And siyam, S-I-Y-A-M, literally means to abstain. So it's about abstaining from something. And what makes this, out of those 5 pillars of Islam that I spoke about, what makes this significant is that praying, you're doing something. Giving giving zakat, that tax, you're doing something. Performing hajj, the pilgrimage, you're going somewhere. But fasting, you're not actually doing anything. Because you're not eating, you're not drinking, and you're refraining from things. And so it's a much more internal spiritual thing of that. Even though I'm going about my day, doing things, working and engaging in my day-to-day activities, I'm actually in a constant act of worship, which I'm not doing. So that's what's so special about this. And in the Islamic tradition, it's seen as one of the most special acts of worship because you can't really show off. Like prayer or giving charity, you can show off about it. I'm doing these things and I'm a great person. You really have to go out of your way to show off about fasting. You have to really tell people, do you realise it's not obvious? So it's a very special act of worship between the human being and God. And fasting, even in the Islamic tradition, in the Quran, it mentions that Mary, she fasted, but the fast wasn't a fast of what we do, not eating and drinking, it was not speaking. So she went on a vow of silence, and so essentially fasting means to refrain from things. But here in Ramadan, we are speaking specifically about not eating, not drinking any liquids as well. My mother still shocks when she says that you don't drink as well. But yes, we refrain from drinking and eating from the beginning of dawn, the first rise, when you see that first light, which is about 4 o'clock in the morning at the moment. So it's not sunrise. It's that light. So Muslims, what they would do is they will get up about 3:30 in the morning at the moment, and they will have what they call it's called suhoor in Arabic, which is like a midnight snack or something. They have something to eat, and that they would usually have something a bit substantial at that time, like porridge or something heavy that's going to keep them getting through the day, get their liquids in. And then they have the first prayer once the dawn comes in, which is about an hour and a half before sunrise. That's the first prayer of the day, which is about 4:15 at the moment in the morning, until sunrise you can pray it. So they'll be getting up, maybe doing a few prayers. So they're performing their ritual prayers, which you'll see here in supplications, and then they'll be eating some food, praying that prayer, that first prayer of the day, and then most probably at this time you go to bed. And then they will get up, and they're not eating or drinking for the rest of the day up until 8. It's up there. You've got all the prayers right there actually. You've got a nice demonstration of them. So Maghrib is, which is what time is it there? 8:30. So no liquids, no food from then, not for 1 day, but for 30 days. So 29 to 30 days, depending on the calendar, because the month is lunar. It's not fixed. It can be 29 or 30 days. So we're going through that. That's the main act that is known for Muslims during the month of Ramadan. But also, there's a lot of people come together in the mosque for the last prayer, which is the Isha prayer you see there, which is what's it saying there for the Isha prayer? 10 o'clock. So they gather around each mosque at a different time, around that time, 10 o'clock, they'll be praying that last prayer and then doing some voluntary prayers into the night as well together. So they're doing that from the 1st of the month up until the 30th of the month. So there's fasting, there's extra prayers, there's charity, and then there is the last 10 days, and we are in the last 10 days of Ramadan, is considered a special, blessed time, where there's a special night in it called the Night of Power and the Night of Destiny. It's called Laylatul Qadr in Arabic. And it's like a prayer where it says God decrees everything for the next coming year. And it's a night when all the heavenly spiritual realms come down and visit the people in this realm. So the angels come down to the earth. And so it's considered a very special night, but it's hidden. No one knows what it is. So everyone's sort of seeking that out in those last 10 days and really striving and doing extra acts of worship in these last 10 days. To the point some of the community will decide to stay in the mosque for the whole of those 10 days. And that's what we call like a spiritual retreat. People will stay in the mosque and not go out for those 10 days to really just cut off from the world and spend 10 days just completely engaged in worship. So you'll see these tents, people get their tents pitched up so they can seclude themselves, and they're just coming out for the prayers and going back in. So these are the most common things you'll see Muslims engaging in the month of Ramadan. And then obviously at the end of Ramadan, once it's ended, we have what we call the Eid. So we've got two main Eids for the Muslim community. We have the Eid at the end of Ramadan, and then we have the Eid, which is when the Hajj rites are finished in Mecca, in Saudi Arabia, and everyone celebrates the ending of the pilgrimage there. So these are the two main celebrations. I suppose the next question is does everyone fast? No. It's not incumbent upon everybody to fast. If people have ailments, they're ill, they have diabetes, they have struggles where it would be too difficult for them to fast, they don't fast. What do they do instead? Usually these people will give charity to poor people who can't afford food so that they can break their fasts and they gain the reward of, it's like they gain the reward of the fast as well. So there's many things, even though fasting is the most obvious thing in Ramadan, it doesn't define what people do in Ramadan. There are many other things people do, like I said, charity giving. You'll often find Muslims inviting one another around their homes. Sort of what we're doing for you in the community today is that it's encouraged to feed people. And so people would go to one another's houses. There'd be like some families would have this roster of who's seeing who on which day. So it's quite a communal thing. Just going through the pop quiz. Yeah, and what's the most famous thing that Muslims break their fast on? Does anybody know? The dates, yeah. And I used to think when I was young, when I used to be back at home at Christmas, I used to get these really awful, these dates coated in glucose syrup from Tunisia. Do you remember them? The plastic thing. That's all I knew dates were back then. There's actually over 30 different, I think there's probably more than that, but there's around 30 different types of date. And I was surprised, actually, some of them are like less, and they're very juicy, and very different to a glucose-covered syrup dates that we used to get at Christmas. So that's the most popular thing, and that's the thing that's encouraged. Like, people usually break their fast on water and on dates. That's a traditional thing. And then they will take that and have some other fruit as well, and then they'll pray their prayers, and then they go back, then they come together, and then they have their main food. So that's what people will be doing tonight. You'll be eating before that, don't worry. And what's the significance of Eid? So Eid is like a celebration of that we've finished this month, and to celebrate what we've achieved in this month. Because we've come together as a community, we've done something that is difficult. We've been fasting, not just one day, 30 days continuously, doing extra prayers, and it's sort of a celebration and reflect about what we've achieved, and to really thank God for giving us this gift of being able to basically show up in this blessed month and do these acts of worship. And there's a tradition in the Islamic faith that says the angels they wait around the prayer area where people come to pray and perform their Eid prayer, and they're giving out gifts to the people as they leave. And what are those gifts? They're like spiritual gifts. Because fundamentally, what does fasting bring us? And that's what I wanted to look at. If I haven't gone over my time, how am I doing for time? Am I alright? Is that what do we gain fundamentally from fasting? Fasting is seen as it's a sacrifice. You're giving up something. And in giving up something, there is gain. What's that gain? Resilience. That you can, challenging yourself to do something and realising you can achieve amazing things. I mean, I often, many non-Muslims remark, it's quite amazing that you can even do this. And really, what I think two factors that make it easy to do fasting is, number one, is that the motivation, but number two is that we're doing it as a community. And I think one of the biggest lessons I learned is that when you're doing something, you understand why you're doing it, the significance, and also when you have the whole community around you and you realise people from all around the world are doing this, it makes something far easier. People often say, I couldn't do it outside of Ramadan. It's just because people are doing something communal together, it makes it so much easier. And I was reflecting on that. It's that struggle and doing things together in struggle. There's a huge reward in that, like the satisfaction. I remember in Keighley, I don't know how I always recount this, but do you remember it was so icy in Keighley that people were having to crawl on their hands and knees just to get across the road? And I was going down Highfield Lane, which was treacherous in that period, and everyone was winding down their windows and saying, "Are you right? Do you need something?" And if you think about the floods that we had in Keighley as well, everyone comes together. When we know we're all sort of experiencing the same thing together and struggle, it sort of brings human beings together, and we feel a purpose, and we feel like all those inhibitions. Like that guy would not normally wind the window down and ask after my well-being. For some reason, when we're all going through something together and it's a struggle, it just bonds people in a special way. So that's one of the biggest blessings, I think, in the Muslim community, is that it brings this real buzz, and you realise when we're doing things together and we've got a focus on something, we can do it. And even what seems difficult, seems insurmountable, we can actually achieve something. And then to reflect on what we gain from that. It's interesting, I don't know if anyone's heard about this French psychologist, I think he was, Walter Michel. He did this marshmallow test. Have you heard about the marshmallow test? So he got all these kids together and he said, you can have one marshmallow now, or you can have, I don't know, I think it's 3 or a packet, I don't know. If you can control yourselves, I'm going to put these marshmallows in front of you and you're not to have them. And how long did he keep them there? I don't know, it's 10 minutes or half an hour, I don't know. He says the ones that you can have it now, just one, you can have a lot more if you can restrain yourself for 10 minutes. So he had these kids sitting there and they were like really trying to distract themselves from the marshmallows, and some were like playing with their fingers, some were turning their backs, some were actually picking their nose and eating it in order to distract themselves from, I want to get this reward of more than one marshmallow. What was interesting, they found the kids that were able to actually restrain themselves, they tracked them through their lives, and they found that they were far more successful in their relationships, their careers and so forth, because this idea of self-discipline and being able to sort of put off initial reward for something that's later, it really instills in the person this sense of being able to discipline themselves to achieve something that's a longer term goal. And I suppose that's one of the biggest lessons I take from fasting, is that it really gives you this sort of inner ability to say, you know what, I could do something that gives me immediate gratification, but actually there's something that feels so much more satisfying if I hold myself off and do something that if I hold myself off, and I will get it, but it will be a lot later, and that develops an ability, this idea of self-restraint. So these are some of the blessings that I've sort of taken from Ramadan and fasting these 30 days. And that in sacrifice and in self-discipline there's growth. You actually feel stronger in yourself, more confident in yourself. And there is a tradition where the Prophet Muhammad said, fast and you find good health. And now we know there's this whole range about fasting, isn't there? Now there's different types of fasts, of course, but this idea of that you're just giving your body some rest. So when I always think of this, anyone remember the numbskulls? Was it Madina or the Landy? I can't remember. But it was those little humans inside that human being, and they're constantly working. So there's some operating the brain, some operating the stomach, and so forth. And like when the way I imagine it is that when we're fasting, our body, like all those little people inside us, say, "Oh, you can relax now. We don't have to worry because there's not this constant consuming of things where we have to sort of process it." And then it can start thinking, you know what, those walls do need painting, we do need to do a bit decorating. So it's often, when we're fasting, our body can actually recuperate and it can replenish itself. So that when we actually hear that stomach growling, we think, oh, my poor baby, it needs to be fed. It's actually the stomach growling out of relief, saying, "Oh, relax now." So the way we actually reflect on our reactions towards things is down to interpretation. And so often it's about reflecting of my behaviours. Does that mean that or not? And that fasting gives you that time to sort of reflect over. And the other thing that fasting does is it breaks your habits. Because often what we do is, I'm getting there, 7:45, okay. I'm going to wrap up now anyway. When we fast, you get up in the morning and you think, "Oh, breakfast, hang on a minute, I'm not eating. What am I going to do with my time?" And then we go to work, don't we? And then we say, "I can't wait till lunchtime. What am I going to have for lunch?" And then you think, "I'm not going to be eating. What am I going to do with my time then?" And so it's almost as if you have to reflect over your day, what you do with your day. Because how often we fill our day with things that we just expect. And then fasting sort of breaks that whole routine and we're having to reflect over what we actually do with ourselves in our days. So these are some of the sort of reflections and wisdoms of fasting that I've taken. I'm done. Any questions? We've got till 7:45, so there's 15 minutes if people would like to ask any questions.
Yes, just a very quick one. Do you find that youngsters are as keen as the older end to become involved in the community?
Right. So this is a general question.
This is something that I was brought up as Baptist, actually. And most of the Christian churches now are really struggling to get into it. So I just wondered if it is passed down and they're quite happy to go along with that, trying to help do
I do ask myself that question because I see these beautiful, specifically in Keighley, all the Methodist churches and different churches that are here, beautiful buildings. I look at the dates of when they were established, and now a lot of them are empty, and it didn't take many generations. And I do reflect on that. And I think what often happens, and we're speaking specifically about migrant communities that are coming in. So I think majority, I'm speaking specifically about the Indian subcontinent community here in Keighley. They've reached about third, fourth generation maybe max. And I do feel, I often say, is that first generation, they generally hold on to their culture, their identity, their practices and so forth, as a generalisation. Second generation as well is that they still feel this connection to the first generation. I believe it's third generation that's crucial to it. They often do not feel a stronger identity. And again, I'm generalising here, but and it's crucial at that point, the third generation for any community, is if they want to instill anything, whether it's just their own morals, their own culture and so forth, it needs to be framed in a way they understand it, because they're not just going to take it for granted. And I do ask questions about that. That Muslims, and they are facing these struggles now. What is the future? And I can't really answer that question, but I definitely do know they're struggling, because I'm a therapist and a counsellor, and now that obviously mental health is not as taboo as it was in the last few generations, people are now opening up and exploring their own mental health and accepting, acknowledging this is a problem. You do see them really struggling with their faith and with the mental health and so forth. And so it's imperative, I think, this is how I feel as a Muslim sort of acting in the community. It is imperative in contextualising for people to really understand, for them to understand in their lived life the relevance of their religion. Because if they don't, I think it will go the way the Muslim community will struggle to hold on to that, and they will struggle to see the relevance. Because just we do things because we do things is not enough. Once you hit about that third generation, I think that's when it's crucial that they really understand what's the point of doing these things. And that's why in this talk, I've tried to speak about the wisdoms. Why do we do these things? What's the benefit of these things? And that's the sort of language we need to speak to the current generation. Does that answer your question?
It does, thank you.
But taking that point, when we walked in, there were many young people here.
Yeah, so that's what I'm not answering the question is there less? I mean, I haven't done the statistics to say. All I'm saying is the challenges are there, and the youth are. I think I lived in Morocco for many years. I think there is still this sense of community, and the youth are there, but I don't think you can take that for granted. I think it's imperative that, and I do have those fears, and we do need to address those things. But yes, generally, if you look at other communities, I do feel there's still a passion amongst the youth. But I said we can't.
Sorry, I just think about films like East Disease.
Oh,
yeah, that was a very old film.
Yeah.
Now.
Yeah.
I think then.
Yeah, no, they had this.
Kind of breakdown.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, as me as like sort of a counsellor, it's really important just to speak to people's lived experience and not, this is my identity and this is what I do. That's just not enough for people. And just to be real with people, people have real struggles. Yes.
Richard's been keeping for quite a long time. I've not seen very much in the way of true integration between the communities.
Right.
Do you think it will take a few more generations before that?
I hope so. Yeah. I think it's really, I mean, what I learned, I only can speak to my lived experience. I was in Morocco and I came back here, and to be honest, in the first few years I was in Keighley, it was very easy for me to stay within the Muslim community but what happened for me is that I started developing anxiety about any sort of challenges and dealing with difference. It was only when I came and started, I had to go into counselling and psychotherapy and go through my training on dealing with different people, that was such a breath of fresh air. I was like, it's so nice to be challenged and to meet people and sort of just show up with one another. And that's why I suppose I spoke about, you know, those incidences in Keighley, like the ice and the floods. It's really, we need to find, I think it's really important for us as all those communities to find something we'll share. I found it in going to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu in Keighley. So it's so beautiful for me to see people from really diverse backgrounds, people who have, you know, from people who have been in prison to, you know, to young Asian lads coming through, and we're all interacting with one another. I think it's really important that communities have a shared vision of something that means something to them. We're not just coming together for the sake of, you know, it looks good and, you know, it's pleasing the local authorities so that we look like we're doing our part. It's got to be something real that concerns everybody. And I think we need to focus, you know, my reflections are, I think it's important for us to reflect on what we can put together that really feels important to us all. And generally when we do that, we do integrate and we do learn to sort of appreciate one another and see the shared communities and realise that we are, you know, especially these young generations, there's not a major difference. They're going through the same sorts of things and we all need to be there supporting one another.
How did you choose when you first went to Morocco?
That's interesting. When I first went to Morocco, I was studying Arabic at Leeds University and I'd just become a Muslim. I was like 6 months. And so I went to Morocco and I thought I was Luke Skywalker I had this romantic vision of I'm going to, because Fez, where I lived, is incredibly beautiful. I don't know if anyone visited it, but it's one of the most well-preserved ancient cities in the world. And I lived in the old city with donkeys going through the streets and so forth, and you hear the chanting in the mosques and so forth, and I was just like, I thought I was in a Star Wars movie or something. This is my spiritual realisation and so forth. And I think I was accepted. And people looked at me odd, this white guy walking into a mosque sometimes. But Morocco itself was diverse because you have the Andalusian culture, and some people are very fair there as well. So I think I'm unique in my position in that I came back, especially in England, I came back and the Muslim community welcomed me because I'm sort of a learned person as well, and there's a lot of respect for sort of my learning. So I feel like I'm a bit of a chameleon. I can just blend in. So I've not really had struggles, to be honest. I don't know, does that answer your question? I don't know.
It's actually good to talk about. What does the Quran say about Jesus?
Oh, so in the Islamic faith, the belief is that basically most of the biblical prophets are again accepted into the Islamic faith. They're mentioned in the Quran, many of them, not all of them. And then Jesus was believed to be the last prophet that was sent to the children of Israel. But obviously they differ in terms of they don't believe him to be the Son of God. he came with what was called the Evangel, which is Evangel, which is the scripture. No, there's none of there's no deification. They're considered, all of them, to be bringing the message of calling people back to the oneness of God. So they were men, but they were very specially blessed people. But the distinction between Muslims and Christians on that issue is the whole deification of Christ. That's what they do. Does that answer your question? Any more? We've got about 5 minutes if you do have any questions.
Why is there such problem with trying to depict Muhammad as a person? Why? Because there's been dreadful massacres in places where somebody has been accused of drawings.
Oh, so you're talking about what's the word? Yeah. So there's been, a lot of those things have been political. There's a political sort of whole thing around it. So when those first, actually, that specific incident, when that first, if my practice is not great, but I recall reading that when those initial things came out, there wasn't actually a blow up. It was a few months later. There was some sort of, I can't remember exactly what was happening. If anyone can help me here, but there was some sort of thing that sort of really rattled it up. I can't remember what it was. But we have the same thing with obviously the satanic verses in the 80s. Was it the 80s or the 90s? With some mentioned. So you'll have these blow-ups, but what I find interesting is that there's, first of all, to answer your question directly, it's considered in the Islamic faith to be forbidden to have any sort of animate objects drawn, so animals or human beings or so forth. There's this idea is that God is the creator of the human being and it's sacred, it's not to be depicted. Prophets specifically are considered that we're not trying to, I suppose, first and foremost, there's a fear of the deification of the prophets. So if we put them to statues, we have drawings of them, we go the way of Christianity in terms of the idolatry. That's the principal thing. But I think with those issues that arose, it was more the disrespect rather than the drawings. And that these people are considered incredibly sacred and to be honoured and not to be just like someone. I suppose the only sort of issue, the only sort of example I can give today is say you hold your grandfather incredibly dear to you, and then someone was just insulting him and mocking him. How enraged you would be about that. It's sort of considered taken very personally to that person. That's the sort of example I would think of how someone would feel about that. Does that make sense? Oh yes, yeah. I'm not justifying the violence. Yeah. Sorry, there was a lady there that had hand up before. Yes.
Are the different mosques in Keighley different denominations, for want of a different word? Like for Christianity, they're Baptists and Methodists and
Yeah.
Is that the same?
The most common denomination we have in the Muslim community is Shiites and Sunnis. So in Keighley, it's predominantly, I don't think hardly any Shiites in here to be honest. There are a community in Bradford, but Keighley, the community is quite, on the whole, it's quite from the same strand to be honest, of Sunni Islam. But you will find in Bradford and larger cities, they're the main dominations. I think in Bradford as well, you've got what is called the Dawoodi Mosque, I think, isn't it, by the Morrisons? There's that mosque, I don't know if people have seen it. That's a specific strand of Shiites as well. But 80 to 90, I think if my stats are correct, I think it's 90% of the Muslim population across the world is Sunni. The Shiite communities are much smaller.
All Keighley are the same.
Yeah. What I found very unique about Keighley is there's so many different faiths. Like there's the Philadelphian churches. There's the the Buddhists have their house over near the park, don't they? I didn't realise that Keighley was had the first spiritualist church in the whole of the UK. It's out near Quickfit somewhere. I don't know if is it. Yeah. So I did all my research. The funniest thing I found about Keighley is Wetherspoons, because it was a temperance school. I love that so funny. I just like such the irony, you can see it on it's still marked there, isn't it? So, does that answer your question? Yeah.
follow-up question to that. So you talked about the anger that someone might feel if their kind of father was grandfather was insulted. So that would be understandable. Within Islam, would that be considered correct to have that anger over these kind of events?
No, I mean, emotional responses are considered, like, we should have emotional responses to something. There's a saying, it's said by a scholar, if you're called to anger and you don't get angry, then you're like a donkey. It's an Arabic saying, meaning that sometimes we should get emotional about things, but it's how we respond with those emotions that's important. We're not called to act out in any explosive or rageful ways, but in terms of our emotions are real. We shouldn't, if we feel something, we should own it and acknowledge it. But how we behave, that's a completely different thing.
So you would say it's correct, yeah. So
for example, if I feel angry about something, I should acknowledge that anger in myself and say, if someone insults me, I say, I'm not happy with your behaviour. That's not, this is really, I don't find that acceptable. That's not considered something. I suppose when we look at religions and something, how do we deal with the emotions? And how do we see the intellect and the emotions as two separate things? Do we see that they communicate with one another and so forth? That's often a debate even amongst faiths. What's the place of emotions in the way that we interact with them from an Islamic traditional perspective? And then we will find difference of opinion on this, but traditionally is we own the feelings, we acknowledge the feelings, and we ask how do we actually enact those feelings in the world in a way that's appropriate and fitting, not in a way that's destructive and brings about more chaos and is irresponsible.
You wouldn't really see kind of abandoning anger as being a good thing then? In that
anger is life force, we see it.
Yeah.
Like, if I don't have anger, then I'm going to be depressed. Like, anger is life force, it's an energy to assert yourself in the world, to have drive. But it's how you show up with your anger. Sometimes it's appropriate, sometimes it's not appropriate. So it's utilising it in a way that serves you and serves humanity, rather than disowning it and saying and demonising anger. Does that make sense?
It helps me to understand much better, thank you. Yeah.
I think we're done. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, everyone, for being so patient. And thank you, Idris Watts. We will go down now to the bottom hall for food for the dinner, and hopefully opportunity to carry on the discussions or different discussions. So make your way down, please. Thank you very much.